I was asked by members of our church if I would provide some sort of Bible study for us during lockdown. And we thought about various ways which we might do this, but we decided that I'm going to present some material on a selected Bible passage, and this will be posted on Facebook and on YouTube so that you can watch it whenever you want to. Now, at the end of each presentation, I'm going to leave you with a couple of questions to ponder and to reflect upon. And if anybody wants to ask any questions about what I've said or share some of those reflections, then there's the opportunity to do that in the comments on Facebook, or we could start a messenger discussion. So we're just going to give this a go. So try it and see what you think, and any constructive criticism will be gratefully received. The suggested focus for this Bible study is Acts. Given that when we're recording this, we are in between Easter and Pentecost, it seemed like an ideal book to study. But also the fact that Acts starts with a group of huddled and scared disciples and ends with a world-changing church. So what book could be better to help us reflect on our discipleship and also the role and purpose of our church? Because during lockdown we've had to reflect on how to do things differently as a church. So let's see what we can learn from the early church in Acts. Now, I'm not a biblical scholar, and I don't pretend to offer anything new or revolutionary. I just wanted to gather together some information from the biblical scholars and maybe add my own personal reflections and thoughts, and to help us to think about how these passages relate to our lives and to our church today. I've chosen as my companions Bishop Tom Wright, William Barclay, C.K. Barrett, and various study Bibles, including of course the Wesley Study Bible, being a good Methodist. So today I offer you an introduction to the book of Acts as a whole. And then next time we'll look at chapter 1 and we'll take each chapter as it comes. And for this introduction, we're going to think briefly about who wrote Acts, who it was written to, why it was written, and what the key points of the book of Acts are. So firstly, who wrote Acts? Well, we're as certain as we can be about any biblical author that Acts was written by Luke, who is also the author of Luke's Gospel. The Gospel tells us all about the life of Jesus, and then Acts continues by sharing with us the life of the early church and those first 30-ish years. We don't know a great deal about Luke. He appeared to have been an educated man, and it's widely assumed that he was a doctor, mainly because of the type of language that he used. We can deduce from his writings that he was a Gentile, and therefore he was the only non-Jewish writer of the New Testament. And he wrote for the intelligent reader. He knew about style and about language. The only other thing that we really know is that Luke was Paul's companion, and he travelled with Paul to Jerusalem. We know this because in Acts, when it refers to Paul's journey, it often says we did this and we went there. We know that Luke was loyal to Paul because when Paul writes to Timothy in his second letter, he says that only Luke stayed with him when he was imprisoned in Rome. Now, during Luke's travels with Paul, he would have met many of the key disciples and followers of Jesus. He will also have heard Paul's stories firsthand, and so this puts him in a great position to be able to write an account of the life of Jesus and of the early church. And he was very methodical about his research and the presentation of his writings. So who was Luke writing for? Well, both Luke's Gospel and Acts are dedicated to Theophilus. Now that name literally translates from Greek as friend of God. We're not 100% sure if this is a specific person, or whether Luke is writing to any friend of God. Theophilus could have been a specific person, but maybe Luke didn't want to name him because it was dangerous to be a Christian at this time, and so he wanted to protect the identity of the person he was writing to. The fact that in the beginning of Luke's Gospel, Luke uses the term Your Excellency or You're Excellent when referring to Theophilus implies that if Theophilus was a specific person, then he was probably a high-ranking Roman official. And it could have been that Luke was trying to persuade this government official that Christianity was a good thing and that Christians were good people, and trying to persuade him against persecuting them. So we have the author as Luke the doctor, who also wrote Luke's Gospel, and it was written to Theophilus, who was a friend of God and may or may not have been a specific person. It could be that Luke was actually writing to us as friends of God today. So why did Luke feel the need to write Acts? Acts starts just after the resurrection of Jesus and continues until we find Paul in prison in Rome. It's the history of those first few decades of the Christian church. And as Barclay helpfully says, it's not an attempt to plot the week-to-week activities of the church, but rather to open a set of windows and give vivid glimpses of the great moments and personalities of that period. The book was written for a Gentile audience, perhaps to show that Christianity was for all people of all countries, and maybe as an attempt to counteract the Jewish assumption that they were the only chosen and important people. But most importantly to me, Acts shows us how the Spirit was at work through these early Christians, and how through God's Spirit the church grew and spread from Jerusalem to Rome. If Luke's Gospel was about Jesus' work on earth, then Acts is how that work continues through the power of the Holy Spirit. And these are two really important principles, that the church is for all and that it grows through the Holy Spirit's work. And no doubt we'll be reflecting on these two more in the coming weeks as we look at further chapters of Acts. But they're two principles which should speak to the church in every age, including the church today, as much as it did then. Is our church for all? And is our church growing through the work of the Holy Spirit? So what are the key points and stories of Acts? Well, the first, I think, is to do with Peter. And Peter had a huge transformation. We remember at the end of Luke's Gospel how he denied Jesus at a very critical moment, but then he was reinstated on the beach. But now, at the beginning of Acts, Peter is making huge speeches and he becomes the leader of the new church. This was an exciting time when the church was growing rapidly, but it wasn't an easy time to be a Christian either. Because the church was growing so fast, it was coming in conflict with the Jewish and the Roman authorities, and a lot of people were being martyred. It was a time of persecution, and so the church needed Peter's enthusiasm, his energy, and his courage and confidence in order to inspire it through such times. Here was a man who talked about how something new and life-changing had happened to him. He'd been forgiven, he'd been given new life and a new start, and he was passing this on as a possibility for the entire world to experience. Second key theme is about the Holy Spirit. This period of Acts was a new age. God was doing new things, starting at Pentecost with those who were there then and extending across the world through the power of this Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is a key part of Acts. It's a constant figure. inspiring, protecting, providing courage and energy and passion, and pushing Christians to greater lengths to spread the gospel. The early church was not without its internal issues. There were problems to do with leadership and money and ethics and divisions and theology, and these aren't glossed over by Luke in Acts, but they're included in order to help and inspire the church today to get through problems with the power of God's Holy Spirit. We also have the story of Paul and how he started off as a persecutor of Christians, holding the coats at Stephen's stoning, and how he was transformed into one of the leaders, the key people in Christianity who wrote the majority of the New Testament. And so Acts is full of journeys. For Paul, it's about literal journeys as he was hit storms and as he was shipwrecked. But for a lot of the characters in Acts, it is about their internal journey and their internal stories. The whole book of Acts is about how Christianity wasn't safe. It wasn't a safe option. It was a dangerous and life-changing faith. But it teaches us that whatever we face following Jesus and doing the work of his kingdom, the Holy Spirit will guide us and make us fruitful in his service. Tom Wright comments on the strange ending of Acts. It finishes with Paul in Rome, and we're left wondering what happens next. And Wright suggests that it's like the story continues, but we become part of it. We and all the Christians that followed Paul become the key characters in taking the story on, taking the church forward. And the book of Acts, therefore, is important to us because we need to remember how it all started and keep referring back to see if we're playing our parts and if we're doing them properly and how we were meant to be doing. So some questions for you to ponder. I've got 3 questions. The first one is related to the journeys. The journey Peter took to be leader of the new church, and the journey Paul took, not just physically, but his journey from persecuting Christians to being the expert who wrote most of our New Testament. And I invite you to reflect a little on your journey of faith, either over the whole of your life, or more specifically in the last few weeks or months. What have been the key factors that have influenced your faith? What has drawn you closer to God? And what has made you turn away? So the first thing to ponder is our faith journey. The second question to ponder is, how safe is your faith? The whole book of Acts is about Christianity being not the safe option. It was dangerous and a life-changing faith. But has our faith become safe and comfortable? What is there in our faith today that is life-changing? How would your life be different if you didn't have faith? So the second thing is about how safe is our faith. And then my third question or thing to ponder is about the Holy Spirit. How comfortable are you thinking about the Holy Spirit and the workings of the Holy Spirit? What questions or challenges or causes for celebration come to mind when you think of the Holy Spirit at work? So there's just 3 things to ponder as we've reflected on the book of Acts as a whole. As I said, if you'd like to leave comments, if you'd like to share some of your reflections in the comment section, then please do that. And next week, we'll be looking more specifically at chapter 1 of Acts.